Ladies and gentlemen, this is a warning. Thank you.
Prostitution has been referred to as the oldest profession in the world, and time again, followers of true crime know it may well be one of the most dangerous. Every city has their red light district where sex workers congregate. For Grand Rapids, Michigan, that area is Division Avenue. While the lifestyle is certain to always have casualties, a 2-year span from 1994 to 1996 saw at least 12 women murdered. Most, if not all of them, were known prostitutes and drug addicts. Their strangled bodies were all dumped in either ditches or woods. Did Grand Rapids have a serial killer?
Goes on in San Francisco for the man known as the Zodiac Killer.
There could be a serial killer in Chicago.
The Oakland County child killer.
Phantom killer.
Frankfurt slasher.
4 children have now been murdered.
Has killed 5 and says he's going to kill again.
15 brutally murdered young women.
The pattern is the same.
One by one.
The death count started rising.
A man in a mask robbed, tied, and stabbed them.
Strangled, stuffed in burlap bags.
It is highly unlikely that these women were murdered by separate men.
Where will the killer strike next?
Police can't answer who or why.
That's the question that we'll never know.
I don't want to live the rest of my life wondering if this person's going to be caught.
I believe that there's someone out there that has knowledge.
And he's probably still at large.
It was August 2nd, 1990 when Denise Ruth Griffin was stabbed to death and thrown from a moving vehicle near Rockford, just north of Grand Rapids along US 131. Then, in November, the nude and beaten body of Linda Faye Borst was found floating near this boating ramp in Plainfield Township, also just north of GR. The divorced mother of 2 had recently been laid off from her factory job and had been on the streets in order to feed her children. Another 2 months later, 22-year-old prostitute Lisa Krolzik jumped from a pickup truck traveling north on 131. Police believed she was hit by 2 other vehicles before traffic could stop, but miraculously, she survived. 3 days later, while she was still in critical condition in the hospital, it happened again. Like Lisa, the anonymous woman stated a middle-aged man held a knife to her throat in the car, causing her to flee. Her screaming alerted a nearby state police officer who had pulled the car over, but by the time he arrived, the attacker was long gone. Only suffering a few minor cuts, this time the woman refused medical treatment and was noted as having returned to the streets the following night. Finally, the news began to pick up on the attacks, and articles appeared in the paper. Police stated the only link was the women all worked on Division Street, but the vehicles and descriptions were all different. It was March 17th when 23-year-old Carrie Mansfield pulled into the back parking lot of Trinity United Methodist Church, just a few minutes from downtown. Neighbors across the street would hear her screams and see a vehicle leaving, and they managed to write the license plate down. That plate belonged to 44-year-old high school teacher and hockey coach Richard Jensen Jr. He confessed that he had gotten into an argument with Mansfield after deciding to not go through with it, and in a fit of rage, stabbed her 55 times. He would be picked out of a lineup for the Krolzik abduction as well as one of the other murders, but would be given a life sentence for just the murder of Mansfield. With Jensen off the streets, things cooled down. For a while. It was March 1994 when 24-year-old Lessa Oppberg was found in the woods off Hackley Avenue in Muskegon, a city about 40 miles northwest of Grand Rapids. Today, the area is this apartment complex, but back in '94, the mother of 3's body laid in the woods for an estimated 3 months after being strangled. It was November 6th that year when a pair of rabbit hunters came to the end of the road at 32nd Avenue outside of Marne, a small village halfway between Muskegon and Grand Rapids. The pair began walking down this dirt path that is just off the highway when they spotted a skeleton.
Detectives carefully placed body parts in bags, hoping criminal science can help them ID this victim. Rabbit hunters found the badly decomposed nude body last night. By this morning, investigators suspect they have a killer at large.
The individuals
was found lying on its back up against some brush underneath some small saplings with some brush piled on top of it to attempt to conceal the body.
Police pulled some clothes out of a nearby creek but wouldn't comment on a possible connection, and a metal detector failed to turn up any real clues or a murder weapon. Area farmers say that this dead-end area with this 2-track running along it has long been a party place for area high schoolers. They say this summer, however, was a little different. Jim Record recalls his son coming home early from several big parties along this path, complaining about an awful smell.
There was one big one early spring, but then after that, there just hasn't been anybody around all summer. It's really funny that usually it goes through the whole summer, but this year there wasn't much.
Oddly enough, detectives believe this victim died in the spring or early summer. Medical examiners from both Kent and Ottawa County will team up on this case, piecing clues together. Detectives say they first must identify the skeleton before they can begin searching for a murderer. In Ottawa County, Chris Halsney, News 8.
An autopsy was conducted in which the cause of death was determined as an unspecified homicide. Though some clothes were found scattered around, her identity could not be determined. A bust was made, and in an effort to humanize her, rather than be called Jane Doe, she was named Matilda. Bones were sent to the FBI for DNA testing, but it proved unsuccessful. It would take 28 years for this woman to finally have her name back. But let's stick to a chronological timeline. It would be June 1st, 1995, when 33-year-old mother of 3, Pamela Lynn Verrile, was found beaten to death in a thicket off of Veterans Drive along Grand River in Walker, a suburb west of Grand Rapids. It's worth noting that a boat launch is less than 600 feet away from the approximate dump site location. On October 4th, 1995, the body of 39-year-old mother Gail Annette Cook was found strangled with a rope in a creek bed almost at the end of Leonard Street, northeast of the city. Gail had a history of arrests, and at the time of her discovery, she was a runaway from a prison work release center in Lansing for a 1993 charge of possession with intent to distribute. Also, you'll notice the age given in the press release is 42. In another article, she was listed as 37, while her obituary notes 39. This is just one instance of the inaccuracy of the few, if any, reports on these women. In 1989, Dawn Marie Shaver was an outstanding achiever in a high school all-state academic competition. But by 1996, when her body was found in Indian Mill Creek below these train tracks on the west side of GR, she had an arrest record for prostitution. The 25-year-old had blunt force injuries to her head, chest, and abdomen and died of strangulation.
Police now know who the woman is whose body was found on a wooded hillside in Grand Rapids West Side.
Investigators say dental records led them to identify the skeleton as 36-year-old Michelle Becker of Comstock Park. Her family reported her missing 10 days after she vanished at Hall and Cass on Grand Rapids southeast side. Investigators say a brother dropped her off so she could buy crack cocaine. That was on April 27th. Police still don't know the cause of her death.
That short blip is the extent of 36-year-old Michelle Becker's murder. If you're keeping track, she would be victim number 6 in a span of less than 2.5 years. Later interviews with her mother revealed that Michelle had gotten married at age 19 to a man who would later die of a heart attack. She had turned to prostitution in order to afford her crack habit, but had spoken of attempting to give up drugs and get God in her life. But her mother stated, and I quote, "The devil had a hold on her." The same day Michelle was found is the estimated time of murder of Sherry Jean Stewart Brown. Up to this point, all the victims were young white women, but the murder of Brown and several other African American women in the next few years are going to have enough similarities to warrant inclusion. Sherry had become a mother at age 16. She would keep the child, later have another, and finally get married and have 2 more until the crack epidemic came to Grand Rapids. she would become addicted to the drug and turn to prostitution. By 1996, her parents were taking care of her children, and Sherry lived alone in an apartment in GR. They paid the 32-year-old woman a visit in August to celebrate her son's birthday, bringing a peach cobbler pie, her favorite dessert. 3 days later, when they returned, the pie was half eaten, but Sherry would never be seen again. This is Butterworth Drive Southwest. This same road leads to Veterans Drive, and back in the city's early years was a mining area. Today, some of the gravel pits are still active, but housing developments are springing up, and much of the riverfront is parks and bike paths. It was 1998 when a driver along these roads would spot a group of dogs dragging bones onto the street. Something made her stop and follow them into this former mining area, where she would discover a human skull. Investigators first believed the remains to be male, but DNA sent to the FBI would prove it to be Sherry Brown. Meanwhile, it was September 21st, 1996, across from the former Butterworth gypsum mine, that a jogger was using this trail. In the underbrush, they would discover the body of 27-year-old Sonia Marie Campos. She was believed to have been killed around September 4th, and like Sherry, no cause of death could be determined. Just past the Gerald R. Ford Airport is 76th Street. Today, a number of condominium developments are springing up, but back in 1996, it was a largely wooded area when on October 3rd, a delivery truck driver spotted something in a blanket in the ditch near the intersection with Craft Avenue. Inside was a strangled body of 29-year-old Sharon K. Hammock, clothed only in a bra and her necklace. The mother of two had been 1 month pregnant with her third child. She was last seen standing on the corner of Division and Banner. Finally, after 8 known victims at the time, a 14-member task force was formed. Police were still reticent to say it was a serial killer, stating they believed there were multiple perpetrators. However, in at least one interview, Captain Kevin Belk stated, "Certainly some of these cases are related, if not all of them." Just as they started, the task force would get 2 more victims in the same month. First was 39-year-old Cheryl Lynn Mason. Just off of 131 in downtown Grand Rapids, this empty field behind a factory at 100 Logan Street is where her body was found on October 13th. Family described her life as a mess. She had 6 children, 2 of whom lived with their grandparents, 2 in foster care, and the 2 other elsewhere. The divorced mother was homeless and addicted to cocaine, which she paid for via prostitution. Though she was estimated to have been killed around August 6th of that year, it would not be until 9 days after her then unidentified body was found that she was reported missing. Likewise, 29-year-old Victoria Moore was believed to have died around August 1st that same year. Her body would be found by a squirrel hunter in a wooded clearing by the Rogue River in Tyrone Township, about 20 miles north of the city. Victoria had a history of prostitution and was reported missing in September just after testifying in a murder trial of 3 young men accused of beating a woman to death over a drug debt. A nonprofit organization named Rosehaven Ministries stated that an influx of women had come to them to leave prostitution in fear of their life. The director of the ministry told the news that 5 of the victims had been in contact with them at some point. A church fund called the Voice for the Silent was started to aid in the search at this time as well. Canwright Street is a quiet road in Plainfield Township, just north of Grand Rapids. Early reports state that it was October 1st of 1996, but later ones say it was 97 when the body of 26-year-old Dawn Charlene Phillips was found in the woods off of Canwright. No cause of death could be determined, but it was believed she died in January 1996. Phillips would be counted as the last in the 11 unsolved cases. After the bodies stopped turning up, the task force leads had all gone cold by the following summer and they would disband, and they would not reopen with Philip's body found 3 months later. Then, there's also the case of the Ada Jane Doe, who would be found July 31st, 1997 in this roadside park, just 12 miles east of Grand Rapids.
It was July 31st, 1997 at this roadside park on M21 east of Ada that a worker picking up trash instead uncovered a mystery, a skeleton hidden in the brush at the back of the park. Investigators believe the remains, scattered bones, had been there for at least a year.
There was a heel fracture on the left side of her nose.
Detectives at the time hoped the skull, largely intact, would hold the key to the woman's identity.
The question will be to try and match them up with the dental records of someone that is missing. Hopefully we'll have a missing report with these dental records.
But 2 decades, multiple detectives, several sketches, and a clay composite later, police know only that she was black from 20 to 30 years old. A single dark blue leg warmer was found nearby.
The bones may have been there since March or August of the previous year, which led detectives to state they could not say one way or the other if her case was related. It would not be until 2004 that a similar murder occurred that would lead police to reopen at least the Sharon Hammock case. It was the evening of January 3rd, 2004 when 31-year-old Yvonne Renee Scott met with police officers in this area of Clyde Park Avenue to report 2 people had robbed her. After giving her statement, the officers noted she began walking towards 28th Street. Yvonne had a history of prostitution and was addicted to crack, but her husband stated she had been attempting to pull her life back together. Police reportedly had a suspect whose car and home were searched, but finding no evidence, they had to let him go. Before we get to the other suspects in the case, there are 4 final women who deserve to be mentioned. They're all listed as missing persons, which is why they have never been officially included. 37-year-old Robin Scott went missing on January 18, 1995. 26-year-old Fonda Lockridge was last seen on June 15th that year. This was 5 days after victim 3, Pamela Verrill, was found. 28-year-old Kathleen Davis disappeared on July 10th. Finally was 18-year-old Jaziel Colazo Rios, who disappeared on October 5th, the day after victim 4, Gail Cook, was found. We know the following summer women were disappearing at a fast pace, while only 2 known victims were killed in the summer of '95. Is it possible that any of these 4 missing women met the same fate? Until they are located, we can't be sure. Let's now turn our attention to the suspects. After Sharon Hammock's case was reopened in 2004, detectives traveled to a New York jail to interview a woman serving time for prostitution. Back in November 1996, she was working Division Avenue in Grand Rapids when she called 911. The unnamed woman had met with a man and agreed to have sex with him. The couple drove north of the city to this gravel pit in Sparta, which for the record is a straight line 6 miles west of where Ruth Griffin's body was dumped in 1995. While they were here, the man turned violent. When asking if she would ever see her family again, he replied, "You'll never see them again." Somehow though, she did manage to escape. 2 weeks later, that same man attempted to pull her into his car while she was working division, but unbeknownst to her, police had been surveilling her and arrested him. Referred to only as the Comstock Man for the area he lived in, he was charged with kidnapping but pled guilty only to attempted gross indecency, meaning sex in a public area. In 2004, he declined to comment on the case when asked by news reporters, but his mother stated he was cleared of everything and it wasn't her darling boy. Detectives, however, did manage to get his DNA, but simply said they had taken the investigation as far as they could. While the prostitute murders seemingly stopped in 1996, it was November 30th, 1997 when 22-year-old nurse's aide Billy Joe Watson was walking by Highland Park just outside of downtown. It would be 4 days later when her raped and strangled body was found along the railroad tracks under the Gerald R. Ford Freeway overpass. Police found a car nearby that had fingerprints belonging to 50-year-old James Allen Kinney. Kinney was a Vietnam veteran who had been a drifter since the 1980s. In 1996, he came to Grand Rapids and checked himself into the Veterans Clinic here. Shortly after the murder, he quickly left for Iowa, leaving behind just about all of his personal belongings. 2 years later, he would be wanted for the similar murder of a woman in Virginia. Police in Ohio and other states were also after Kinney for murders when another woman was found in Highland Park. Just hours before a dog walker found her body on a grassy slope, 18-year-old Jessica Ledfer had been raped, stabbed, and strangled. Locals feared Kinney had returned. While he would eventually be captured and sentenced in the Virginia murder, Ledford's case would be solved in the year 2000. Mark Osborne was a friend of Jessica's and was walking with her that night. He claimed the two had consensual sex, but she had gotten upset afterwards for cheating on her boyfriend, at which point he accidentally stabbed her. He got a life sentence for her murder. 2 years later, Billy Joe Watson's killer would be found. Garen Leon Mason had been out of prison for just 3 weeks when he killed her. His DNA also linked him to a 1982 rape, strangulation, and stabbing that occurred at the home where this empty lot is on Vree Street, just off Division. 20-year-old Phyllis Cruzel was babysitting when 17-year-old Mason broke in and attacked. He had raped another woman a week prior, for which he would be sent to prison until 1997 for. He was sentenced to life for both murders. Another multiple murderer was Troy Blake. It was October 16, 2008 when he picked up Mary Louise Parker on Division and agreed to give her gas money in exchange for sex. But then he grabbed her hair and dragged her to a picnic table on Burton Street, where he smashed a bottle on her head, beat and raped her before trying to strangle her with her own coat. Fortunately, a police officer spotted the assault and gave chase. He would later be arrested and convicted of the assault along with a quadruple murder of a family in Wright Township just a few weeks prior. After beating Catherine Brown to death during an attempted rape, Blake then shot her boyfriend Tyler Zimmer, his brother Jeremy, and their mother Charmaine before setting the home on fire. In March 2008, Janine Lusk was found behind this truck repair in Wyoming, Michigan on her 41st birthday. Evidence found led police to Sid Terrell Jones, a man already in custody for holding a knife to another prostitute's throat in that very parking lot after refusing to pay. Gregory Kelly was convicted in 2006 for transferring prostitutes from Grand Rapids to Detroit. He was known to have been a violent pimp, assaulting one prostitute in the street and kicking another in the stomach when she was pregnant. He denied any involvement in the murders and would die of COVID behind bars in 2020. Edward Joseph Hill was publicly named a suspect after he robbed a prostitute in November 1996. Serial killer Larry Dwayne Hall was announced as an unofficial suspect in the case, and he is suspected in up to 50 other murders in Michigan and the Midwest, despite being only convicted of 2. Hall would travel across the Midwest to attend Revolutionary and Civil War reenactments, where he would also abduct, torture, rape, and finally murder young women, with his first suspected murder being a 15-year-old schoolgirl in Grand Rapids in 1981. And finally is Jamal Lacey, who is suspected in at least 3 of the original murders and is currently serving a life sentence for attempting to strangle 2 other prostitutes. It would not be until 2022 when these cases returned to the media. First, in January, in conjunction with the DNA Doe Project, police announced they had identified not 1, but 2 victims.
Yeah, Doug and Janice, for years and years she was called only Matilda, kind of like Jane Doe, but today we learned her name is Shelley Ray Kephart, and it may not seem like a huge development, but for detectives, they tell us that this piece of information, their investigation into what actually happened when she died, can begin.
Where we were able to identify a missing person named Shelley Ray Christian, or Shelley Ray Kephart.
After 27 years of investigating a homicide, Captain Jake Sparks and other detectives say they've been able to identify the victim. Throughout the years, Captain Sparks says they investigated it on and off, working with medical examiners and other agencies, but nothing resulted and they had no leads. Until last year when they teamed up with the Doe Project on obtaining DNA, which led them to Minneapolis.
So after meeting with family down there, doing quite a bit more investigation, we were able to get some DNA samples from family down there in Minnesota.
And were able to identify the victim as Shelley Ray Kephart, a huge gain for the investigators.
In an investigation, I think the main challenge in not having a name is not being able to trace back her steps. Find out where she was last known to be.
But now they say the investigation into what happened in 1994 can begin.
Next would be the Ada Jane Doe. Stephanie Renee Judson was 31 years old at the time of her disappearance. She lived in nearby Benton Harbor and seems to have been similar to the other women. In 1984, when she would have been just 18 years old, she was sentenced to 30 days jail for not paying child support. The year prior, she was caught stealing clothes from a Kmart store. Then, in August, another announcement came forward.
Cold case cracked. A long-haul trucker from Florida is in jail tonight, charged with the 1996 rape and murder of a Grand Rapids area woman.
The killing of Sharon K. Hammock was one of a dozen murders in the 90s that police thought may have been connected. Target 8 investigator Susan Samples broke the news of the arrest today. Susan.
DNA left on Sharon K. Hammock and on a rope used to tie her up led Kent County Sheriff's detectives to Gary Dean Artman, an over-the-road trucker now based in Florida who lived near where Hammock's body was found in Kent County nearly 26 years ago. This is the face of the man Kent County detectives say raped, strangled, stabbed, and bound a 29-year-old mother of two. Arrested Tuesday in Mississippi, 64-year-old trucker Gary Dean Artman's DNA has also connected him to the murder of a sex worker in Maryland. Hammock was the 9th woman killed in a string of 12 murders of women who worked Grand Rapids streets in the 90s.
There are sufficient similarities to cause us to go the next step.
A task force was formed to investigate the murders, but no charges were ever filed until now. Detectives submitted DNA left on Sharon Hammock for genealogy testing and compared it against DNA submitted by people tracing their family tree. It led them to a couple with 4 sons. Only one had ties to Michigan, Gary Artman, who admitted he lived near where Hammock's body was found in 1996. Detectives have not revealed if they think Artman killed any of the other Grand Rapids area victims. DNA also linked Artman to the killing of a woman found raped and stabbed to death in Maryland. She had been in California shortly before her murder, and evidence showed Artman was near the same California town at the same time. The long-haul trucker did 11 years in a Michigan prison in the 80s for a rape conviction. He's in a Mississippi jail tonight awaiting extradition back here.
Sex workers have often been called the less dead when compared to other victims who garner front-page headlines. Just because they were prostitutes and addicted to drugs does not mean that they don't have family and friends who miss these women every day. Well, after 25 years, the cases may be getting a little more light thanks to some dedicated criminologists. But there's still a lot more work for their families to find justice in learning who murdered the women of Division Street.